Dr. Lena Adams Kim. So I know her as a colleague and a friend at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and especially with our work in setting up a new mindfulness program. Or EPA is 100,000, not 100, no, that's wrong number, 10,000 person organization, and trying to set up an agency-wide new program that recognizes the importance from a neuroscience standpoint, and from a standpoint of our mission, why mindfulness matters. So setting up that program, and then Shruti I learned about for the first time through the EnviroCare coordinators for our zone. She came and spoke. And then as I got to know my role and the international organization's webpage, how much Shruti has done for the SSSIO international organization, EnviroCare activities, the environmental sustainability activities, as well as being this amazing entrepreneur on sustainability issues and coaching and business, and bringing together indigenous knowledge and into the work of sustainability, and as well as being a young adult and an officer in that program. So much. So thank you so much for being with us today. I'll again invite everyone to go off of video if you're not one of the speakers. And I'll ask you just for a moment, I have some questions, some of which came up through the registration. So some of our audience members have specific questions for you, so I want to have those. But the rest of it, I'd love for this just to be a conversation between us. So if you want to comment on each other, that would be fantastic. And we could just see where that goes, and then also have some time for the audience members to continue to chime in and ask questions of us. So we'll try to manage all of that in the time we have available, and ask for folks forgiveness a little bit that we're starting this panel a little bit late, so we might go a little bit over 5 o'clock Eastern time for this. But we still have a fantastic lineup after that too, with a game show. So the first question kind of brings us actually back into the space that we started with this beautiful music, and that is folks wanted to know, what is mindfulness? What is it? And maybe Lena, if you could take that just with the description and actually an exercise, I think that'd be a beautiful way to start.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to see Shruti again. And to answer your question, what is mindfulness? There are different definitions of mindfulness. The one we use within a large federal agency that resonates with many people who don't necessarily want to go the spiritual route is one that was developed by a neurobiologist named John Kabat-Zinn. So I'll share with you that definition. It's paying attention on purpose to the present moment without judgment. And that sounds very fancy and simple, but I'll give a quick example of what that means. When I was a parent of young kids and I was being unmindful, sort of like reactive and stressed, if my daughter said, "Can you play with me?" I was cooking dinner, I was sort of half-heartedly playing with her. My mind was on my to-do list, and I was thinking about something else. So several things. So not paying attention on purpose. And I was judging myself because I was doing all 5 of those things pretty badly. So the layer of judgment on top of not paying attention to the present moment. Going back to John Kabat-Zinn's definition, paying attention on purpose to the present moment, which is very hard for human beings in the Western world to do, without judgment, rewinding, if they were still young again, which they're not, a more mindful practice would have been my young daughter saying, "Can you play with me?" I knew I had to cook dinner, but maybe stooping down and saying to her, "I can play with you for 5 good minutes," focusing on purpose with playing with her, enjoying every single moment, the moment that my mind wandered to something else, not self-flagellation, like no judgment, I know my mind wandered. Let me bring it back. So it's a practice of coming back to the present moment over and over and over again, without judging yourself for when your mind does wander. That's the definition I like to share. It's a definition that allows people who have a spiritual practice, like many of the people on this call, to be able to amplify their spiritual practice by paying attention on purpose in the present moment to the spiritual practice you are practicing. I have Catholic friends, I have Buddhist friends, I'm Buddhist, and I have people who don't believe in any religion, and they can all apply John Kabat-Zinn's definition.
Thank you. Well, so would you mind leading us through an exercise or through a meditation practice of 5 minutes or more?
5 minutes, sure. What I will do is consider a practice that seems simple, but some people will notice that it's not so easy. So mindfulness is simple but not easy. It's training our brains for this practice by focusing on our breath to pay attention to one thing on purpose in the present moment. And we will use our breath as that thing. In mindfulness, we call that an anchor. It's sort of like a ship that's in the ocean being tossed about by the waves, and the ship throws the anchor in, and then it sort of steadies the ship with that anchor. Our mind might be the wave, if we're going to go with that metaphor, being tossed about by worries and to-do lists and Ukraine and all this stuff. And our breath can be a really useful anchor, because usually if you're sitting in a Zoom meeting, you have a breath. We're all breathing here.
Yes,
so we all have access to this thing, which is wonderful. And this breath is rhythmic, and it's easy to pay attention to something rhythmic. And we like the breath in the mindfulness space as an anchor because it's not that interesting. So it's a good thing to practice, because if we all could practice watching our favorite Netflix show, paying attention on purpose to the present moment, that's actually not very good practice. So the breath is nicely boring. It makes you work to pay attention. Right, Shruti? Is this a good description for you? So we're gonna spend maybe 4 minutes paying attention to our breath, and I'll talk you through what to do with your mind when it wanders, because it will if you are a human being. I would invite you to sit in a way that feels both alert, but also relaxed. And for many people, that means a few shoulder rolls backwards. If you're sitting in a wheelchair, you know how to sit alert yet relaxed in a wheelchair. If you're laying down, you can lay in a way that feels dignified. So what you're doing by channeling your body in this way is you're using your body to send messages upstream to your brain that you are ready to pay attention in an alert way. You're not getting ready to fall asleep. So neuroscience tells us our brains, we usually think they're sending messages downwards constantly. That's true, but our bodies are also sending messages upstream. So it's like circular. So sitting in a way that feels alert yet relaxed, sitting nice and straight, if you can access that. I like to imagine an imaginary string pulling the top of my head up a little bit and then tucking my chin down just a little bit. Just that little motion makes many people feel a little bit more dignified in how they're sitting. And feeling dignified is a really nice way to pay attention to your breath. Close your eyes if you're comfortable doing so. You can, if you don't want to close your eyes, you can be mindful with open eyes. I would suggest lowering your gaze so you can limit visual distraction. This is why people close their eyes when they meditate. And I would take a moment to have you just notice where your hands are. If you have one hand, notice where your one hand is. If you don't have any hands, then you notice where your feet are. Just notice either your hands or your feet, and wherever they are, just notice how they feel. So it's taking a mindful moment to pay attention to something. Your body, like your hands and your feet, are always in the present moment, unlike your brain, which is usually yanked to the past or the future. So you're feeling relaxed yet alert, sitting dignified. And I'd invite you to take 3 of the deepest, longest breaths you've taken yet today at your own pace. And as you're breathing, you're paying attention to your breath by just accessing deep, long breaths. You're paying attention to that. I'm sure several of you haven't yet taken deep, long breaths today. If you can breathe, inhale into your belly instead of lifting your shoulders, all the better. I like breathing out through my mouth. And maybe for the next few breaths, you can breathe in through your nose, deep into your belly, and then exhale through your mouth. Maybe you have a little audible sigh that sends messages upstream to your brain that you're relaxed. In through the nose, deep, deep into your belly. Exhale through your mouth, little audible sigh. And one more time, in through your nose, deep in your belly. It's this called diaphragmatic breathing. And exhale. So now we can return to just regular breathing, which means through your nostrils only. And when you breathe in, just know that you're breathing in. And when you breathe out, just know when you're breathing out. And what you're doing is you're being mindful of breath. You're paying attention on purpose in the present moment, which is your breath. Now, if your mind has wandered by now, that's not surprising. That's what our minds do. In Buddhism, they call it the monkey mind. Just notice wandering. Bring it back to the breath. If your mind has wandered right after that, note wandering. Bring it back to the breath. So you're breathing at a pace that feels comfortable to you. If you're wondering, wow, this seems boring, note thinking. Bring it back to the breath. What you're doing is you're treating your wandering mind, which has been conditioned by life to be busy with many times worries or projections. And instead of letting that just happen to your brain willy-nilly all throughout the day, what you're doing is actually noticing when it happens with mindfulness, framing it with a label, wandering, thinking, worrying. The moment you frame something with a label, you take away its power. You bring it back to the breath. If you're an experienced meditator, you might just only be on your breath. Comfortable and at ease, dignified, happy to be focused on this anchor. Breathing in, noticing you're breathing in. Breathing out, noticing you're breathing out. What you're doing is you're building the neural pathways of focused attention. The neuroscience and fMRI tell us this. The more you focus on just one thing, the more you're strengthening the area in your brain that focuses on anything, like a work task, a young child, a moment of beauty. If you're a newer meditator and your mind has wandered 100 times by now, that's not a problem. That's normal. All 100 times of you noticing each time it wandered was a moment of mindfulness and really good for your practice. Breathing in. Are you breathing in? Notice how that feels when you're breathing in. When you're breathing out, are you breathing out? How does that breath feel when you're breathing out? If it's sort of boring, that's what the breath is. It becomes quickly less boring when you don't have access to breath. If your mind has wandered for the 50th time, note wandering. Bring the attention back to the breath. Every single time you bring your attention back to the breath, you have had a moment of mindfulness. You are strengthening your ability to focus attention to the present moment. If the 50th time your mind has wandered, you've said to yourself, oh my gosh, can't it stop wandering? Move that judgment away. Bring it back to the breath. In the final moments of this simple meditation of noticing our breath as anchor, I'd suggest we take maybe 3 breaths deeper at the very end, in through the nose, exhale, audible sigh through the mouth. In through the nose, exhaling an audible sigh through the mouth. A final breath or 2 in through the nose, deep into the belly, an audible sigh through the mouth. You can wiggle your fingers and toes and open your eyes if they were closed. The neuroscience and the social science tell us the fact that we were breathing together, knowing that we were breathing together actually amplifies your mindfulness practice, breathing in community, even though you're not physically with one another. So there was our practice.
Thank you so much. Oh, I feel so much more relaxed now. I don't know if others do as well. The one other thing I noticed was how compatible this practice is with the teachings of Satya Sai Baba, our teacher. Just how compatible it is, the idea of being here in the present moment and trying our best not to worry about the past or the future, or regretting the past or worrying about the future. And wow, as it's something I know I have found a lot of benefit from, this kind of mindfulness practice, which is why I incorporate it in my days and why I've been involved. But for those of us, maybe this is new to on the phone or on the in the audience today, maybe they're wondering, like, what on earth does this have to do with environmental sustainability, which is part of the topic today. You know, our tagline today for this event was Sai and Sustainability. We've had a lot of emphasis on that topic. So I'm going to ask Shruti, actually, can you share with us, you know, what are your thoughts? What is the relevance of this kind of practice or mindfulness or intention and being in the present moment to environmental sustainability? Also, what does it have to do with the Sai organization? Those are questions.
Yeah, beautiful question, and thank you all for having me. It's a joy to be with you. Thank you for the lovely practice, Lena, to settle us even more after the lovely music. Breath is such a beautiful thing. Maybe there's a couple of ways I'd love to answer this, Chitra. The first, I think breath is one of the most powerful things to connect us to nature, to life, to our interconnectedness with all creation, which is very much this journey we're on, back, you know, from separation to oneness. And I might ask you if you all are willing just to take one more deep breath, just as you did with Lena a few times. So just another big inhale and exhale. And just to ponder, while you enjoy that last breath, what that breath has done for you. It's amazing, like the doctors and biologists will know that breath is helping turn food into energy. It's helping detoxify our blood. It's helping, you know, mentally, emotionally, to settle our mind and our thoughts. It does so much to keep our bodies functioning, to allow respiration so that we can be alive. Without this breath, none of us would be here. And it's amazing if you start to think, where does this oxygen come from that we breathe? 75% of the air we breathe comes from the ocean. The other 25% from the trees. Normally we go, oh, trees, actually most of it comes from the oceans. How does it come from the oceans? Well, algae and bacteria photosynthesize to produce oxygen. So in some ways it's algae and bacteria that are keeping me alive through my breath. And if I think about where that, you know, what happens to the algae and bacteria, we saw in the video, beautiful video before this program started, that our oceans are going off balance because of overfishing. And nature, if anything goes off balance, that has implications on all of life. You know, when we overfish one fish, there's less of the next one, and then too much of the algae and too little. And then, you know, literally my breath depends on the health and the balance of the oceans, let alone the trees that we're cutting down at such a rapid pace. And so at one level, I think breath and paying attention to our breath is so powerful, because in each breath, we can feel and appreciate, I cannot exist without nature. I am part of nature. Nature is me. I am nature. And really not just intellectually think, but really feel our interconnectedness, which is what this journey is about. I think the other aspect of mindfulness that's really important for me, for many years, my kind of interaction with environmental sustainability issues was very much an intellectual one. You know, at school, we learned about reduce, recycle, reuse. We learned about sealing of desires in our SSC programs, you know, to save water, save energy. So I'd been exposed to a lot of these things. They were good things to do. Teachers encouraged them. Parents encouraged them, Psi family encouraged them, and so we did them. And I think it's really in the last few years, through practices like mindfulness and really being with nature, that acting sustainably is not such an intellectual thing that's good to do, which of course we should do anyway, but a much deeper love and reverence and respect and wonder for nature has sparked in my heart. And it's really been, you know, sitting quietly and just observing the trees, observing the grass, observing the plants, observing the seasons, observing the sun, the moon, just being with nature, just observing it with a quiet mind, which is actually quite easy in nature. It's one of the beautiful things. Our mind gets so busy in the work day, when I'm in front of emails, but when I'm in nature, it's quite easy, as I'm sure many of you will appreciate, to allow the mind to settle. And in that quietness, there's a mystery waiting to be discovered. There are insights and teachings on how to live. There are answers to the problems of the day. There is just a beautiful sense of peace and love, which is what I am, that I can feel and experience in nature. And so going back to your final part of your question, Chitra, and what does this have to do with the organization? Swami has told us nature is the manifestation of God. Nature is the best teacher. Nature is the vesture of God. Literally, it is, I feel like going to a park is like going to a temple, you know? It's like a place where I can experience God's divinity, God's wisdom, God's presence, and discover it in a way that's unique to me, without the conditionings of what it should be, or the judgment, the stories of do a ritual in this way. It's kind of a unfiltered, natural way to experience God and how to live, and to really feel that in a heartfelt way. And so that's a few reflections on what mindfulness has to do with nature.
Thank you. Wow. Lena, do you want to add on anything? I mean, I would invite you to share anything that comes to mind, including if there's anything about your sort of personal journey that fits.
Well, as Shruti was talking, and it was so inspiring, it reminds me of something that Thich Nhat Hanh used to say, and he would say that he still says it in all of the people that were his students. He says he told the students.
And Thich Nhat Hanh is, can you tell everybody who he is?
Oh, he's a Buddhist meditator, peace activist, friend of Martin Luther King, powerful nature activist. He called himself an environmental activist before it was cool to be an environmental activist. But he said that to him, nature was a mindfulness bell. So whenever he looked out at anything related to nature, or whether he was in nature, he saw that as a chime of mindfulness. And that was like a reminder to be present in the moment without judgment. So I think it's beautiful that he, instead of using the chime that we all use in the mindfulness world, he didn't need a chime. Well, he actually used a lot of chimes, but that's another story at Plum Village. But he said, use nature as a mindfulness bell. He also said, and it's something that I think when I'm taking walks throughout Center City, Philadelphia, I don't live in a very natural, immediately green environment. He said, every time your foot touches the earth, consider you are kissing the earth with your feet. So when you walk through the park that's near my house, that's all pavement, you can sort of walk through the park with your mind elsewhere, or you can pay attention to each time your foot strikes the ground and imagine your feet are kissing the ground, and you are not separate from that ground, which is nature. You are nature. We are I see ourselves as little earth bodies. I call people that, you're a little earth body, I'm a little earth body. We're little earth bodies on the big earth body. So a lot of what I think with regards to mindfulness and the natural world is informed by Thich Nhat Hanh and his writing. For people who aren't familiar with him nor mindfulness, he's a really great access point in the beautiful yet simple way he writes about mindfulness and the environment. You had a second part of your question, Chitra.
I was curious about your journey. Like, how did you end up where you are, in both exploring mindfulness so deeply and in your, professional life, being at the Environmental Protection Agency, of all the places you could have landed, you picked working there and then applying your passion for and your practice of mindfulness to try to stand up an agency-wide program so that everyone can benefit from that. Like, how did you, is there something that this group might find really inspirational? Because that's what this event is about, to try to find inspiration through our stories.
Well, I do think it's funny, the old Lena, when you had said what inspiration, I would have thought, oh my gosh, I need to have a story. I do feel like human stories are inspiring when we are receptive to listening to how other people's stories are, as mundane as they might be. They remind us we're all the same. These little earth bodies, very similar stories. So I'll give you my simple story, and I know it'll still be inspiring, where I was a military brat raised by a Thai Theravadan Buddhist mom much of my childhood in Bangkok, Thailand. And this is a very mindful space where you go into temples. No one's teaching you what mindfulness means. Ask any Thai kid, they would shrug their shoulders and say, I don't know. But they saw all the grown-ups around them paying attention on purpose to the present moment. And no one in my life is more unjudgmental than my family in Bangkok. So I was raised in a culture that just practiced mindfulness and non-judgment, in a family situation that was like that. Then I moved to America, where my father was stationed when I was a teenager. And I saw that stark difference of a different culture that wasn't steeped in mindful behavior and mindful thought and mindful spirituality. Then that was childhood, sort of, no active practice. And then I became an adult, and through lots of different circumstances, I became a very active volunteer in the hospice, the University of Pennsylvania's hospice system. It's a university here in Philadelphia on the East Coast of America. And I realized that the mindfulness that I regularly practiced, that never thought was that big of a thing, could be something that could support the other volunteers, because sitting at bedside when people are dying actively is stressful. So I became somebody who trained the other hospice volunteers and then families of people who were dying in mindfulness. And it became something that I was skillful at, as well as very comfortable in doing, as well as so comforted that I could support people in that way. Never told anyone at EPA that I taught mindfulness or I practiced it until the pandemic hit. And as the Leonard Cohen song says, the crack is where the light shines through. Everyone was cracked March 2020 throughout the world. And I sensed a level of devastation and sadness with my colleagues whose job was to protect public health and the environment. And I thought, wow, they're devastated, they're stressed. I have actually a little tool that I've kept to myself in my hospice life and in my personal life that I actually can share with folks at the EPA. So I started sharing it, and the response was, as you know, Chitra, pretty amazing, where it was an offering that could support people in doing something that's a very important job. So now we have a program. Chitra, you're one of the leaders in the Mindful EPA program. Chitra has, and myself and a few others have created this offering that supports people who protect public health and the environment in very profound ways. I didn't start this to be more connected to nature, but I see in my mindfulness practice, the more I practice, the more I realize I'm just not me, my little silo of me and my me space worrying about my me things. I am very much connected to every single being that I happen to be around, my dog, my desk, even the non-animate things. We're all made of stardust. We're all made of the same things that came from the Big Bang. And it makes me think of one last comment. A lot of my Japanese friends are Shinto Buddhist, and there is a lot of reverence of the spirit life of all inanimate things. And I think about my friend Ayako, who every time she dropped an orange, this 20 years ago, it always struck me, she'd pick it up and say, "Oh, you poor little thing." She'd do a little rub before putting it back on her countertop. And I used to think, oh, that's so quirky and cute. And now Lena, who uses mindfulness to actually connect with nature and people and inanimate objects, I think of Ayako and I think she was really onto something, because we are all connected.
Oh, that's really beautiful. And there's two things I want to pick up on. One is how you really brought your full self to work now. You didn't have to block off this other spiritual, I mean, I'll use the word spiritual,
Yes.
though you may not. And that's really something that's been inspiring for me, to be able to say, okay, I have this whole segment of my life when I go home that I don't talk to anyone about. And then now I have a vehicle to share some of those things in a very secular organization.
Yes.
To talk about it as mindfulness in a way that Jon Kabat-Zinn talks about it, to bring in this idea, which is Swami's message. It's the same, it's very compatible, and then be able to introduce it to others as a tool for helping them in just one step. We don't know who's going to pick it up, and we don't know who it's going to resonate with, but just that ability to bring it into another aspect of our lives. And, to me, the other part of this that's so interesting and powerful is what you said. No matter what your entry point to it is, to this work or this journey, that it is causing you through your story, you said, like, it is now making you helped you realize that you're not separate. So, and that is the inquiry that Swami asks us to be constantly doing. And the fact that can be accessible to anyone. You don't need to have a name or a form that you're attached to. You don't need to talk about an organization or a leader, that anyone can have access to that. That's actually helping us raise our human consciousness. It's helping us be part of the planetary shift that we need to see to be able to deal with these calamities in the world that are happening, whether it's global climate change or being on the brink of global war, another world war, or having, so many other negative things going on in our cultures and our societies. So we need people like each one of us who are listening, each one of us who are on this journey, to be able to bring our full selves into more places in ways that are people can be receptive to and respond to. So that was my piece of it. And, Shruti, I'm distracted a little bit by how beautiful of a background you have, that's natural background. I wonder if you might share with us where you are, and also kind of reflect a little bit on the fact that this morning, we had so many people all over the country doing service projects, out in nature. They were experiencing nature like it seems you are today. And if you could help connect us to, like, what is the advantage of going out and doing service projects for this kind of shift or understanding or inquiry that we can be doing in our spiritual growth and our sadhana?
Yeah, beautiful. I'm usually in New Zealand, but currently in Argentina, in a little town in the Sierras in Cordoba. So it's a beautiful place. Yesterday I was hiking up a local mountain and had plenty of quiet time in nature. So really, really grateful for the kind of temple nature gives us. I think it's so wonderful that all of you are out this morning, and after the pandemic and not being able to get together in person, let alone do a lot of seva that's not online. It's just such a refreshing thing that I'm sure you would have enjoyed. But for me, there's probably a few ways to answer this. On one level, I feel like a little bit of seva for the earth is the least we can do given everything she gives us. Like, we cannot be alive without her. And the more I appreciate, waking up in the morning and seeing the sunrise and acknowledging the role the sun has in keeping us alive and doing a few humble sun salutations, whether it's, just really seeing that without nature, none of us can be here and do anything. It just evokes a sense of immense gratefulness. And I think in some ways a little bit of seva, it can't ever pay my mother back for the immense love she has for us, but it's a little offering we can do. I think the other thing I love about being in nature and being in the environment is it's the learning ground. It's not theoretically reading about nature in a classroom in front of a screen, attending a webinar. This is also, good and inspiring, and it can be helpful. But being in the place is where we really learn. One of the most beautiful gifts of the pandemic, as you said, Lena, beautifully, the cracks are where the light shines through. In New Zealand, we could leave the home more or less once a day to go for a 1-hour walk within a certain diameter from your home. So there was one park I could more or less walk to, and so every day I would go. And because it was my 1 hour to get out of the house, I'm not an essential worker or anything, I would utilize the full hour in this park. And in the past, often when I've gone for walks, it's been partly to get some exercise, some air, some nature. But this time I would just go sit in this park and just be with the trees, not really walking, not reading, not listening, just to be with them. And there was just so much that I observed, probably a year of doing this, and now it's become a daily practice, seeing how the seasons change and the importance of cycles in nature. I feel like in our society, we're always go, 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 next thing, juggling side work and family and profession, but in nature, there are such important cycles. And you see how in winter, everything slows down, and the beauty of a new sprout in spring and full energy and action in summer. And I think about even us as women, we're so aware of our monthly cycle. There are times for lots of energy and times for rest, and yet how many of our lives, how many of our work routines, how many of our family plans, how much of our side activity really on a cycle? So this is just one example, but I really feel it's being in nature and observing nature that we really can learn life's lessons, that we can really learn the human values that Swami teaches us, that's so present, that's so radiant. Everything nature is, it's harmonious, it's balanced, it's non-judgmental. We don't say, oh, this tree is ugly and this tree is beautiful. The dogs don't judge everything just has its place and can just be there without all the judgment. So I think doing seva, of course, is so necessary for our own self-transformation, as Swami has spoken about in length, and in particular when we can be in these environments, be in these playgrounds, we're just so enriched. And I guess my final thought is, I wonder, many of you probably already do this, but how can seva not just be something we gather together on special days, but become a daily practice? And something I was considering once when thinking about, Swami says, nature is the vesture of God, and vesture meaning clothes. It's not really a common English word we would use, and so I was thinking, if we were physically with Swami and he had a bit of rubbish on his clothes or a bit of dust, probably we would jump to the chance to take that off and keep his robes clean. And what an amazing seva that would be. And in the same, how is a highway cleanup or a river cleanup any different? If this Mother Earth is our divine mother, what an amazing opportunity we have to pick up every tiny speck of plastic. And there might still be 200,000 other specks of plastic at the beach, and it's overwhelming when you realize how much we've polluted our earth. But nonetheless, every single act or opportunity we have to cleanse her and to clean her and serve her is so precious. And so I guess something I've really been wondering is, how much personal comfort am I willing to sacrifice and convenience to serve our mother? How far does my love extend? And how can this be a daily thing, be it, in the bathroom with the water I use, be it the food I'm growing, be it the rubbish I can pick up? And I think that lifestyle, which Swami embodied so beautifully, is really an inspiration for all of us on this path.
Wow, that was really succinct and beautiful. And it's a nice segue too to a question that came in. It's just, how can we do even more? And I think you really put that question very well. It's how much more comfort am I willing to sacrifice for Mother Earth? And that is something I think we all need to be asking ourselves, because that's our daily or momentary practice or sadhana. So I invite anyone in the audience, this is supposed a chance in the next few minutes for you all to ask any other questions that are, bubbling up for you through this conversation. I think we've heard so much already. And while folks are giving that some thought and maybe putting it in the chat, if you have a question, be much appreciated. While you're doing that, I can just ask you all another question. And that is like, what is a nonprofit organization, a global organization that's volunteer based? What could we do? What might be something, an activity, or is it individual activities at home? Like, what might be one thing that you think we could try to take on that would advance in the US our work as an organization on sustainability issues? Wonder if you have any thoughts.
One thing that I think, was this addressed to Shruti and myself, Chitra?
Yes, it was. It was.
There's a lot of judgment, at least in America, related to how sustainable are you? Are you good or are you not good enough? And there are the Whole Food shopping people who are like doing all the right things. And then there's a little bit of the tone of, oh, you're not recycling. I think we all need to, as a culture, get over that, because that ends up separating us yet again. And I like to consider the practice of mindfulness being paying attention on purpose to the present moment. The most important part of John Kabat-Zinn's entire definition is the non-judgmental part, actually, is when you practice that mindfulness, you're actually practicing being less judgmental of yourself and others. And the more you practice that, the more you're able to see if somebody's not doing something that you think is right for nature. You sort of remove the judgment. That's sort of removing the separation you have from that person. And you're able to access the fact that there's a reason, maybe there's less knowledge, less access, less understanding. It opens up the potential of connection for you to be part of the solution instead of, oh, they're not doing it right and I'm doing it right over here. So this isn't the answer to your question, but I do strongly feel like that non-judgmental part of the definition is the access point for us to do better here in America on, putting labels on how good people are at being environmental.
Yeah, thank you for that. That makes me think of something I've heard you talk about, Shruti, which is this idea of going from ego to eco. I wonder if you could say a few words about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what Lena was saying as well. When you said, what can we do? The first thing that came to my mind was, like, what can we be? And when we are loving and when we love the earth, when we embody that, the action's actually really easy. Like, we can all find things to do. We don't need to be told what to do. It's the inner purification, which is hard, which is the daily sadhana. It's the moment to moment mindfulness. It's the taking his name. It's the allowing the voice of the conscience to be louder than the voice of the mind with its likes and dislikes and desires. And for me, that's the hard work, and you don't see the results immediately. So I mean, the overall kind of feeling is just, if we intensify our sadhana in whatever way, that I think is the work. It's the only work. The other thing that also came up with the question is, like, Swami is the ultimate example, and his life is very countercultural. Like, we live in such a consumeristic society. I was reading the other day, if everyone lived like a New Zealander, we'd need 3 and something Earths to sustain us. If everyone lived like someone in the US, the average person, it was more than 5 Earths. So clearly, like, the average quality of life, I'm guessing most of us on this call, is unsustainable. So first, myself included, like, it's very challenging, of course, and we're all trying. So I'm not judging that, but at the same time, that's the reality. And you look at the life Swami lived, he barely had a few pieces of clothes, like every second of electricity, water he would save. I was reading the other day, I heard a beautiful story when the Gujarat earthquake hit. He donated every single one of his good pieces of clothing for people who were affected by the earthquake, and his robes would be turned into multiple skirts, and he kept only the torn clothes for himself, and he wore this torn dhoti at the darshan, which is what some of the students saw, and they even realized this was going on. And so you've got this example of someone who is giving everything out of selflessness, owns very little, lives in a tiny space. And, you know, in our Indian culture, we buy new clothes for Diwali and new clothes for this festival. And it's your birthday, let's get some new stuff and let's buy this and buy this and buy gifts. And so I think we've got the kind of brave work of doing something very countercultural, which is not, at least how I feel our Indian culture is in many ways. I can't generalize, but let alone our Western consumeristic capitalistic society. And so I think really taking Swami's life as an example, not just when it's convenient, but even when it's really inconvenient, I think is a great way forward for us as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. And, you know, this builds on, Lena, you were mentioning that you grew up in Thailand or different places in the world, but many years in Thailand and then moved to the United States. And so I think a lot of people can relate to that, myself included, of hearing stories, if not in our own experience, from, you know, if we're from Indian background, how people lived more simply. And, you know, whether it's that they had multiple people living in a smaller flat, and now they live in by Western standards, you know, by American standards, a very middle class lifestyle, or a lifestyle that, but still has a much bigger carbon footprint, you know, because, you know, we have multiple stories for fewer people. We drive further to get to every place we go. Like that kind of thing is just, it's normal. It's normalized. And sort of what you're challenging us, Shruti, is actually to say, like, how can we take the responsibility as users of nature to actually be counterculture, to do something a little different. So, and at the same time, not be judgmental while we do it, not beat ourselves up. We have too many reasons to beat ourselves up in the world. So, so in a way that brings about love and reverence and just responsibility, taking on responsibility. Because that's the way our teacher, our guru, did as well. He's the example. We have maybe just another minute, maybe some final remarks from you all. I think we hit on some of the questions that have been coming in, and some comments, some really great comments coming in, reacting to what you all have said. And but I do want to just give you an opportunity to say anything that we might have missed, anything that, you know, what I guess one comment that had come in was about, you know, are there apps, are there ways to calculate and sort of, you know, this is almost to the point of like judging ourselves again, but are there things that we can challenge ourselves to do a little bit better? Are there aids? Are there best practices? I think people are eager to hear any of that, if you found any along your journey in our non-judgmental way.
I'm going to let Shruti address the environmental steps, but one thing that I would suggest that is a great access point to strengthen the non-judgmental aspect of our mindfulness practice, or our acting mindfully without even practicing, is self-compassion mindfulness practice, which I know you, Chitra, are very familiar with. The more we strengthen the neural pathways in our minds of talking to ourselves kindly and non-judgmentally, the more what comes out by default from our mouth or our thinking about others will be the same. And that sort of connects us as opposed to separates us from people, as we try to do this all together. And do this is what Shruti is going to address.
Thanks, Lena. There are so many practical things. I just, maybe as a short way to answer this, there's a lot of resources on the website. There's the Serve the Planet website, the Environmental Sustainability website. There's some wonderful folks on this call, Sister Chitra, Brother Doug, Brother Sai Prabhu, others, you know, who have all this knowledge. So really utilize the people locally. There are so many passionate folks about the environment in the US. It's been an inspiration for the environmental work globally by the organization. So reach out to them. They'll have so many suggestions. Personally, the other thing that I feel or I found has been really helpful and transformative personally is spending more time in the garden, growing food and composting. And they're two very, very simple things, but just seeing the amount of energy it takes to grow a little bit of food, you know, instills very naturally, invokes such a respect here. How can we waste food when we see the amount of time and energy and weeding and watering it takes? Seeing, you know, the compost and how from what we would call waste, in our Western language, how that's rich nutrients for the soil, to see how nothing is wasted in nature and how everything goes back into the land. It's just like magic, like it's hard avocado peels and like 3 months later, it's a beautiful soil. And I think spending time in the garden, not only in terms of physical health, mental health, in terms of, growing sustainable local food, appreciating what's seasonal. I think food is a big part of our sustainability challenges in terms of carbon emissions. So much comes from the food sector, agricultural sector. So spending time learning about food, growing food, composting, getting into a community garden, gleaning. I think all of that is one practical thing that for me feels like it opens up a depth in terms of other sustainability issues that are a byproduct or linked to that as well. But I'm sure all of you are doing wonderful things. So I think keep celebrating and taking inspiration and yet also challenging ourselves to keep taking the next step, I think is key.
Wow, thank you so much. Oh, sorry, Lena, go ahead.
I don't say sorry. It just popped into my mind. And as Shruti was talking, an even more simple act that my mindfulness mentor, who is an Indigenous woman and Native American, said that if you don't have time for composting or gardening that day, just go out and be with a tree. She said, just go sit and put your back up against the tree and just be there with that tree and accessing the connection. You start thinking about like, where does my skin stop and the tree skin begin? And when the scientist with like that microscope going really close between your skin and the tree skin, it's actually like all these little atoms that have tons of space in between them. It sort of blows your mind. So she's like, go sit next to a tree. And then post and all the things that Shruti mentioned.
So beautiful. Thank you both so much for joining us today, for being so generous with your time. Joining us from different parts of the world that you're in, making the space and sharing your wisdom with this group. I am seeing the chat blowing up with appreciation for what you've shared today and requests for the recording so that others after today can have the benefit of this. And we definitely intend to do that, to make this available to others, because it is special that we are together. And as it is special that we're together with everyone here in the audience, that does bring more peace when we are in satsang together.